Hi everyone, welcome to this discussion for the piece Conspiracy from the series 21st Century Royalty. 21st Century Royalty is an ongoing series that examines the kings and queens of our modern era, and that is to say, those we admire, those we aspire to become, and as well, what becomes of those who hold the spotlight in the cultural zeitgeist of this 21st century era. For a more comprehensive understanding of the series overall, I will put a link to a series overview in the description of this video. Now, specifically looking at conspiracy, I want to begin with the title of this piece. The irony that exists here is embodied by this grammatical tension with the question mark and exclamation point. Conspiracy theories are always speculative by virtue of their nature, and yet we tend to cling to them and hold steadfast to them, especially in the internet era. The combination of the question mark and exclamation point, again, is meant to evoke this tension that we cling to these proclamations of truth as if they are so, and yet they are by their very nature always uncertain. Otherwise it wouldn't be a theory, it would be a fact, and that's sort of, again, that ironic tension. And so on one hand, the conspiracy theory is always veiled with a sense of unknowing and unknown, and yet it's exclamatory in the sense that we hold to it so strongly and firmly in our convictions. Moving into the composition and the color palette for this piece, I composed it as though the figure sits atop a throne of these headlines and informations that is set against a computer screen-like backdrop. There are file icons that are meant to further this notion. The screen is sort of twisting and cracking as it moves from the left to the right above top of the picture plane, as though it's overloaded with all of these icons and all of this information. Dotted lines are being used to connect certain pieces of information, trying to piece together the information as one might do on a bulletin board with push pins and string. That sort of cliche of a detective looking through the information and trying to find the connections and suss out what is going on based on the evidence provided. Along with references to actual theories, there are newspaper headlines and jargon throughout this piece in the composition, of course, and the newspaper itself appears behind the figure. "They're lying to you" is a phrase that breaks up the flow of the centered structure to emphasize itself above all the rest. If this is a bit of a mountain of headlines and words information, as you can see at the bottom there, it really breaks up the composition with those words and deliberately uses various font sizes to stand out and bring itself forward above all the rest. The throne upon which the figure sits is a folding chair, something suggesting that it is a bit haphazard or rushed or really worthless or a menial position and not really a throne in itself. This piece introduced Tuscan red and crimson red into this series a bit more profoundly. This is the first time they're really working in tandem for 21st century royalty. Here they're building more naturally with the warm tones, and they're meant to express a sense of building heat and tension as things seem to mount within this piece. It's as if the whole picture plane is erupting and the top half is being consumed within the flames coming from below. So it's done very intentionally with regards to how this sort of mountain of information is built. Overall, the palette does slightly nod to the American flag, though that's not meant to be wholly so. Obviously, we have hues of red, blue with a white background, which naturally sort of evokes that sense. However, conspiracies and this idea that we cling to them in the internet era, I think is very much an international issue, and so it's not something meant to be just strictly an American sensibility. Describing these details obviously naturally inclines us to move into the conceptual identity of this piece. One of the biggest things that conspiracy is embodying is this hyper-skepticism that we find in the postmodern era, which I believe is largely promulgated by the internet's spread of information. We are highly distrusting, and it is accelerated by the voices on the internet, which encourage us to trust anything other than what we see or hear, especially from places of authority. Skepticism is natural to human nature, but the internet culture, I think, breeds it even more so and just tends to heighten it and emblazon it more fervently. We find power in information as humans, and I believe the media plays on this desire and feeling of power, and so conspiracy theories naturally create that false sense of enlightenment within us. As human beings, I think we fear what we don't know, yet we crave the truth, and so conspiracies offer us something that seems tangible to grasp in the face of that which we don't understand. So we stockpile ourselves and feed ourselves on this endless parade of information that the internet affords us, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's actually founded on true evidence and fact, or whether it's just theories that people were crafting in order to convince other people. The breakneck, incessant pace of internet culture sort of piles up information endlessly. And evidences of work can be found for any viewpoint given for any situation. It can become very destructive, and that's what this piece is sort of challenging, that there's a destructive nature to it, and it can tend to be a ruinous path, that ultimately this is sort of a fool's errand to really stockpile these theories and try to put our trust and conviction upon them. This piece is an example of what happens to the figure. She is bombarded and distressed, and it suggests that she isn't pleased nor wishing for this, but rather that her life is caught within this prevailing mentality. It's potentially destructive and hazardous to one's mental well-being to hold to conspiracy theories with such conviction. Again, because I believe it's sort of this type of ideology in the culture that wears down our ability to trust anything presented before us. And instead we want to rely on the internet as sort of this safe third party, when in reality, that information can be disseminated and produced by anybody and not necessarily have to undergo the scrutiny of fact-checking or any sort of thing. There are a lot of references in this piece, and I want to go through some of them, but I do want to sort of just scan over them in a broad sense as well, because a lot of the dates and theories that are found in here were from research of actually widely known conspiracy theories that have come to pass or are still held by some. I don't want to go into detail on each one, of course, but naturally I think a viewer will begin to look at these and find ones that are easily recognizable. There is a slightly hidden one, and that is with the eye from the $1 bill that is buried in the lower left quadrant. And I think on further scrutiny, viewers will be able to kind of see and find others within this piece too. In the top left corner, the UFO declassified Navy videos that were released around the same time I was producing this piece were incorporated. The image that I found that's used here is a still from the video that I remember was circulating at the time, and quotes around the image are ones that were found in research from actual individuals who claim to have seen UFOs. I remember this being very pertinent to me at the time because it felt awfully fitting, given that UFOs, extraterrestrials, and outer space can often be either the source of conspiracy theories or play a major role in the content of certain theories. The phrase quid est veritas, which is Latin, and forgive my Latin if it's a bit rusty, it's a reference to what Pontius Pilate questions Jesus Christ in the New Testament when he's inquiring into the charges brought against Jesus in the Praetorium. I wanted to include this phrase because it speaks to the irony that, again, we seek truth through the news media and these conspiracy theories found on the internet, but ironically, they're victim to human transference and inevitable editorialization, just like any other information we get from those sources. Our search for truth ends up being paltry and misguided, unfortunately. The designs of the file icons are, again, meant to evoke an aesthetic similar to Mac OS 9, which is a regular occurrence in the 21st century royalties up to this point. Something that for me is a personal area of nostalgia and was very moving at the time of producing this series and this piece in particular. And so evoking that sort of added a sense of familiarity to me and friendliness that I appreciated, especially when crafting a piece that is so violent and against a backdrop that can be so jarring. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about this piece. I hope this discussion has been worthwhile and that it ultimately gives you a greater connection with this piece. I encourage you to share it with anybody else who might find it worthwhile, and thank you so much for watching. Take care.